So in this tutorial, I'm going to start working on what I define as hard surfaces, meaning the armrest that you see here and the seat structure. Now, because the beauty in Rhino 7 is that you've got subdivision tools and you've got the NURBS tools. The tools that we'll use at the bottom of my screen are the Subd tools to make the cushions. And Subd tools, I find them ideal to create what we call organic surfaces. So anything that is soft looking, like body parts, a human face, plants, definitely the cushions, you know, anything that is soft looking, quote unquote, I find that Subd tools are ideal for that kind of exercise. When you start creating mechanical parts, like a car, for example, or a spaceship, or in this case, it's going to be the armrest, I prefer personally relying using NURBS tools. And that's what I'm going to do in this case. I'm going to start using in the main toolbar, and it's going to be great for the newcomers who want to learn Rhino to explore a bit the NURBS tools that we have on the main tool, on the left-hand side of my screen. If you follow my cursor, there they are. Okay, so you have different you've got different tools. For example, you can create points, lines, curves, circles, ellipses. So you've got all the 2D tools, and underneath these tools you've got more options on how to create or modify your curve. Okay, how to create different ways your ellipses. Same with circles, by just keeping a pressure or right clicking on the icon, and you expand the toolbar. All right, and then we've got to modify the surfaces or creating my surfaces. So here's my toolbar to create surfaces, and to modify them, it's under the fillet surface, and you've got all the toolbars, all the tools, icons necessary to modify and create your surfaces. And then here you've got here to modify your solids. So you go from curves to creating surfaces to creating solids and modifying them. All right, so I'm going to show you step by step how I proceed and how I create that. So for example, I want to create the upper part of my armrest. So it's a nice soft curve, and I'm going to click on this icon here called control point curve. So I'm just going to left click on that, and I'm going to place my first point here. And then the second point, I'm going to stretch it quite a bit. I want my control points to be at a good distance. So the rule when you create surfaces, even with Subd surfaces, is to keep the minimum amount of points as possible, but enough points so that you can follow the shape. Now that I've created that, what I can do is analyze my curve to see how I can make it cleaner. All right, so if I go here under the analyze direction icon and expand my toolbar, this is my analyze toolbar, and in this icon here that you see, it's called curvature graph on. If I click on this graph, I'm going to have a menu called curvature graph. You can play with the density, so that's going to increase or lower the visual cue that you have here. So that shows the acceleration of your curve, that white spike. Now you've got the curve here. You can click on the swatch and you can change the color. So I can change it, for example, to yellow, and it's going to change to a yellow porcupine. Sometimes we call it porcupine or hair comb, doesn't matter. You can also play with the density of your curve, of your porcupine, I mean, and see better how your curve behaves. Now, by playing with these settings, the density scale and the display scale and the density of your porcupine, it doesn't affect the curve's behavior at all. It's just a visual cue to see how it behaves. For example, if I select this control point here on my curve and I drag it down, now you can see that I've got a positive curvature and a negative curvature. All right, so I'm going to click Control Z, and that's definitely not what I want. I want a nice clean curvature, a nice acceleration. So you can see that on the flatter area, the acceleration is small, it's very progressive, and as I go towards the base of my armrest, you can see that the curvature here, it's accelerating even more. So if I take this control point and I just drag it down a bit more, you can see that the acceleration progresses even more. All right, so let me press Control Z to undo that. And I can even clean further my curve if I want to. So for example, this curve here under the fillet curves, if I expand the toolbar, so it's called the Curve Tools toolbar. So it's under this icon fillet curves, you just expand it. You've got this icon here called Rebuild Curve. So in my previous tutorials, I talked more deeply about each of these different functions, and I invite you, whether you're using Rhino 5, 6, or 7, it doesn't matter. All the tools are all the same. And I teach with a previous version of Rhino what they're for. But I'm not going to go back in the details of explaining exactly what they all do. But in this case, I want to clean up this curve, and it's a function that we use often when you use NURBS tools. It's going to be the rebuild curve. So if I click on rebuild curve, you can see that I already have by default a curve of degree 3 with only 4 control points. When you see span count 1, that means it means that it's a single span curve. Now, if I want to modify my curve, I can make it, for example, so this is the original curve. Instead of being degree 3 with 4 control points, I can make it degree 3 with 6 control points, for example. All right. So if I do that, you can see that the span count, instead of being 1, that means single span, I make it span 3. All right. So you can definitely do that if you want. But in this case, I don't see the purpose of it. I prefer maintaining a minimum amount of control points. So I'm going to maintain it at 3 and 4 and just click OK. And you hear, by the way, you see the maximum deviation, 0.001. So it's a thousandth, well, I could say a 2,000th of an inch, because I'm working in inches, of curve deviation. So it's a very, very small amount. And so I know that it doesn't impact at all my curve, or very, very little, I should say. And I'm just going to click OK, and you can see that I cleaned up. So it's distancing the control points in an equidistant manner, and the curve is nice and clean like that. All right. You don't need to use all the time the rebuild curve, but sometimes, for example, let's see what happens with the next curve. I'm going to do again control point curve, click on that, and place a point here. And then place another point here, third point, fourth point, and let's place a fifth point here. So here I need more control points because there's because I'm working on on a longer distance for that curve. And again, I can use the porcupine. So I go back to my analyze toolbar, click on curvature graph on, and here it's interesting. You see here this curve. Even though it's a nice and positive curve acceleration, as you can see in the graph, I can see here a little kink. All right, it's a knot. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. Doesn't mean that it's going to create a dirty surface. That's not true. You can definitely work with this is a typical of a multi-span curve. Okay, you're going to see these types of spikes with multi-spans. That means there's a knot in here. Okay, so there are tools in the toolbar. For example, if I go here, you can remove a knot if you want. Here it is, remove knot. And you can individually remove them by hand manually like that. What I like to do is I select my curve and I go back to my rebuild curve. I go back to my rebuild menu, and you can see that definitely it's a curve that is multi-span, so it's a curve of degree 3 with 5 control points. And I'm going to change it to degree 3 with 4 control points. So single span basically means that the number of control points is only 1 control point above the degree. So for a curve of degree 3 with 4 control points, I'm single span. If I do a curve of degree 4 with 5 control points, I'm still single span. If I do a curve of degree 5 with 6 control points, I'm still single span. And single span is going to make sure that the curve has no knots basically in there. So I'm going to change the structure of my curve, which is right now at 3 and 5. So span count 2. And I'm going to make it single span at 3 and 4. And the deviation, again, it's 4,000th of an inch, so it's very small. And I'm going to click OK. And now you can appreciate the fact that this curve has a nice progressive curvature, as you can see here, if you follow my cursor. All right. So that's a very nice curve. And I can take, for example, this control point and just slightly move it so that it matches more or less my sketch. All right. So I'm just going to hide the curvature graph menu, and I hope you understand what the rebuild function is for. And it's a very powerful and very useful tool, and I highly advise you to use it when you want to have nice, clean curves when you start off. Because it's important to have nice, clean curves when you're using NURBS tools, because it's going to affect the quality of your surfaces later on. All right, so let's move on. I'm going to create for the base of my armrest, I'm going to just create a circle. So I expand my toolbar, and I'm going to create a circle with its diameter. So I'm just going to place 2 points. I'm going to place my first point here and second point so that it matches my sketch about here, like that. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to connect, I'm going to sort of, I'm going to connect, this curve with this curve here, all right? So first of all, I'm just going to hide my sub-D surfaces in the layers toolbar. So it's layer 02, that's where my sub-Ds are. And I just activated the layer underneath it, and that's going to be where my NURBS curves and surfaces are going to be. All right, so to sort of bridge this curve to this circle, I'm going to use a curve under the fillet curves. If I expand the toolbar, this is where I can adjust, modify my curves. And there's a very powerful tool, and I advise you to familiarize yourself with if you're not used to that. It's the adjustable curve blend. So it's a very, very good tool. So you click on this one, and I'm going to click on the first curve here, and then I'm going to click about here approximately on my circle. Now you can see that something weird happening, and I've got this menu, adjustable blend curve, and I can see that the handle of my control point at 2 is flipped on the wrong side. So I'm just going to click on flip 2, and I'm going to change the orientation. Now the continuity of my curves at 1 and 2 are in tangency, and I can keep it like this if I want to. And you can see by playing with the anchor points or the handles, this is what happens. Now I can see that the anchor point at 2 is a bit too near, well, a bit too high. I'm unable, if I play with the anchor points, to follow the shape on my sketch. So what I can do is I can, with my cursor, if I left click, and I can drag this anchor point number 2 and drag it so that I can position and maintain the tangency and try and have a nice clean continuity between these, between my curve and my circle, I mean. And if I'm happy with it, so let me just modify it a bit better, something like that. You can definitely put yourself in curvature continuity if you want to, at 1 for example, and just drag it like that, select this anchor point and so on. All right, so maybe I'm gonna drag it a bit further down like that, and there you go. So I'm in curvature continuity at 1 and tangency continuity at 2. And notice if your curvature continuous, you've got two anchor points here, and tangency continuity I have only 1. If I did curvature continuity, you will notice 2 anchor points here. So I'm just going to, at 2, I'm going to switch back to tangency and just reposition this anchor point about here. All right, so once I've done that, I just click OK, and there you have it. Now you can check with the curvature graph on if you want to. So go back to Analyze Direction, expand the toolbar, curvature graph on, and there's your graph. So I can change the scale by bringing it down, and you can see the acceleration. Because I'm in tangency, it's going to stop short like that. So that's normal, and it's going to accelerate, and then it slows down a bit, and then it reaccelerates. There you have it. Okay, so I've got a nice clean curve for the upper part, and I need to do the same. So I'm going to click again on the Curve Tools toolbar, Adjustable Curve Blend, first curve, then my circle, and this one's not bad. So maybe I'm going to, so I'm in curvature continuity at 1, and maybe I can drag this curve, this control point at 2, and play with my handles like that. Maybe I can put myself in curvature and see what it does for 2. Now it's creating a bit of a mess here. What I can do also is take the control point at 1 and drag it further back, like I'm doing like this, and play with the anchor points and try and shape it. Maybe drag this one a bit further like that. All right, I'm not going to spend too much time. Maybe I should have added another curve here, but let's keep it simple, and let's say okay. Now because I pushed this control point further back, if I zoom in, you can see that I've got this curve here that is intersecting with this one, the adjustable curve that I just created. So now I know that since this curve is touching at this point here, I'm going to use the trim tool. So here's the trim function. I click on trim, select the first curve, enter or right click, and then I'm going to trim off this part of my curve like that. So now I know that this curve is touching that curve at this control point. And now, since I have this curve here and that curve here, I can trim off this part of my circle. All right, so I'm going to click on trim again. I'm going to select curve 1. I'm going to select the second curve. Then I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to trim off this part of my circle, and then right click again. All right. Okay, so when you see this shape, this is a fillet that I've added much later on. What I advise when you start creating shapes, you always go with sharp edges at first. Okay, you don't go with creating these fillets at the very beginning. You maintain very simple shapes. All right, so you'll see what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to take this control points, and I know that it needs to go about here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a line tool. So here's polyline. I'm just going to left click on this icon, and I'm going to activate, make sure that the snapping toolbar is active at the bottom of your screen. And I'm going to snap in end, and I'm going to grab this endpoint, press shift, and I'm going to create a vector that goes down the Z direction. If you pay attention to your axis here, for the left viewport, this is the Z direction. So I just press shift and just make sure that it's orthogonal or goes along the Z direction. Okay, and I'm going to use again the adjustable blend curve, or adjustable curve blend I should say. I'm going to select the first curve, and then I'm going to select my vector, because I want to impose either a tangency or curvature continuity if I want to. Let's make it tangent at 1 and 2 for yeah, like that. Maybe, okay, no, well, maybe curvature at 1 and shape it like that. Something like that. And I'm just going to click OK. Now, because I use the adjustable blend curve, I know that my curve, every time I sketch it, is nice and clean. So if I use the curvature graph on, I'm just going to reduce the scale. You can see how nice and clean that curve is, judging my porcupine or curvature graph. All right. So I don't worry too much to check every time the quality of my curve when I use the adjustable blend curve. Now that vector, I don't need anymore. I can delete this part. So I've got pretty much everything set. Of course, yeah, I could have modified and create a transition curve. So maybe I could have created a curve here and then use an adjustable blend curve, but I'm going to keep it simple and clean like that and just make a slight change to my armrest. So again, you know, I'm going to keep that kink here. I don't worry about doing the fillet. I don't advise you to create fillets with your curves. You've got the tools in your toolbars for solids. Once you've created a solid, to later on add your fillets. All right. So keep your shape relatively, or generally speaking, simple. All right. And once you've done that, I can select this curve, and I'm just going to click on join, which is this icon, and make sure that it says the curve is joined into a closed curve. This is important for the newcomers in Rhino. Make sure that it says it's a closed curve. If it says somewhere it's an open curve, that means you've got a gap somewhere, or you need to you will need to redo your curve so that it makes it closed. Okay. Now, to be able to spot where there's a gap, you can type CRV start and press enter, and it's going to show you with a point where there's a gap. Okay. So type CRV start if you happen to have an open curve, and try and fix it by making sure you have a closed curve. If I select this curve in the properties tab under the icon object, as you can see here, type says closed curve. This is important, and I invite you to always pay attention to that. If you need to make the curve close, of course, you know, it's not all the time that you need to have your curves closed. Sometimes they need to be open, but in this case, I want to make sure that it's closed. So once we've done that, we can proceed to the next chapter. In the next chapter, to add more details to that armrest. So I need to do the thickness of that armrest. So for example, the curves that I've created here are in the symmetry plane, and I just need to move it so that it matches my top viewport. So something about here. All right. So if you look from the top viewport, you can see that my curve on the top view, there's a narrowing at the base of my armrest here. So that's what we're going to do at the next chapter, how to achieve that. All right. So I'll see you there. Thank you.